This video is part 1 of 2 covering lesson 10-4, solving radical equations. So in this first video, we're going to start talking about how to solve a radical equation, which is an equation that has a variable underneath the radical. Remember that whole value underneath the radical is called the radicand, right? Whatever's underneath the radical sign is called the radicand. So it can be an equation, it can have a variable in it, whatever it is, that's what we call it. Okay, so the 2 steps to solving are basically to get rid of everything around the radical sign. So if it's not under the radical sign, move it mathematically to the other side of the equation. And then to get rid of the radical sign itself, what cancels a radical sign? A squared sign, right? Square root and squared are opposites. So then you're just going to square both sides. And that's going to eliminate the radical, okay? So there's a couple examples given to you on this study guide, which I've attached to Schoology here. You can pause the video if you need to. And then we have about 9 down here that we're going to solve together. So let me zoom in a little bit. We're going to start with number 1. All right, so we've got square root of a equals 8. There's nothing to get rid of. We're trying to solve for a. So the only thing here we can do is eliminate the radical sign by doing the opposite and squaring it. And whatever I do on one side of the equal sign, I have to do the same thing to the other side, right? So this 2 cancels this square root, and I'm left with a equals, and on this side, 8 squared is 64. Excuse me. And we're done. Number 2, square root of a plus 6 equals 32. I want to be able to just get this by itself so that I can square it to eliminate this radical sign. So I need to get rid of this plus 6. It's not under the radical, so I need to move it. So I'm going to subtract 6, and whatever I do on one side, I have to do to the other side. So these cancel out, and I'm left with the square root of a equals 6? So the square root of a equals 26, and then we're not taking the square root of 26, we're taking the square root of a, right? So to get rid of the square root symbol, I'm going to square it, and so I have to do the same thing on this other side. So a equals 26 squared, which is, you see that there, 676. 676. And think about it, 676, the square root of 676 equals 26, right? 26 squared equals 676. Makes sense. All right, let's do number 5. This one I wanted to do with you because that negative sign under the radical trips people up. But what's going to happen is when we solve for a, we should end up getting a negative number. So this negative and the negative number we get for a, the 2 negatives are going to cancel each other out, and it's still going to be a positive value underneath the radical sign. So the only thing I need to do here, there's nothing around the radical, so all I can do is eliminate the sign by squaring this side and by squaring this side. So the squared and this radical cancel each other out, and I'm left with negative a equals 6 squared is 36. Okay, so now I've got negative a equals 36. So you can either divide both sides by -1 or multiply both sides by -1, and you're going to end up with positive a equals negative 36. So we can have this negative value in for a because there's another negative sign in front of it. So those 2 negative signs are going to cancel each other out, and we'll have positive 36 under the radical sign, if that makes sense. All right, number 6, we're trying to get, let's scoot over here. We're trying to get the radical sign all by itself. There's nothing else around it outside of the radical. So then to eliminate that sign, I'm going to square that. And whatever I do on the left side of my equation, I have to do the same thing on the right. Now, when I square this, nothing changes under the radical. It's just going to be 3r squared because this 2 only cancels out this square root symbol. The square root squared cancels each other out. Think about it. If I had 4 squared under the radical sign, what's that going to end up being? Well, 4 squared is 16, and the square root of 16 is 4. So basically, this guy and this guy just cancel each other out, and our answer is going to be 4. Same thing here. this little 2 and this square root cancel each other out, so nothing underneath the radical sign changes. So we're left with 3r squared equals 3 squared is 9. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So r is going to equal 3. R squared is going to equal 3. And then I have to take the square root of both sides. So r is going to equal the square root of 3. It does not tell us to round our answer, so we're going to leave it under the radical like this. So our answer is square root of 3. We can't simplify that anymore, so we're just going to leave it as is. Dogs around my feet. All right, number 7. 2 times the square root of 3 equals square root of y. All right, so then we're saying, well, there's 2 radical signs. What do? You're right, there's 2 radical signs. Our goal is to solve for y, so we're going to need to get rid of this radical sign by squaring this whole side. So before I do that, I have to make sure there's nothing else around it. There isn't, so I can go ahead and square this side. It doesn't matter that this side has a radical because there's no variables with it. The side with the variable under the radical has to be by itself. There can't be anything outside the radical, and that's true here. So I square this side, I square this side. So here the 2 and the radical cancel each other out, and I'm left with y on this side. Here, each of these is going to be squared, so 2 squared is 4, and the square root of 3 squared is just 3, right? This 2 and the square root cancel each other out, and I'm just left with 3. So now I've got 4 times 3 equals y. 4 times 3 is 12, so y is going to equal 12. And you can always go back and plug in a number for your answer and check your work. If we have the square root of 12 and we factor it, it's going to simplify out to 2 times the square root of 3. All right, number 11. We've got 3b minus 2 under the radical, but then we have this plus 19. So the first thing I want to do is get rid of plus 19. So I'm going to subtract 19 from both sides of my equal sign. So I'll be left with 3b minus 2, all under the radical, equals 24 minus 19 is 5. Okay, now I've got nothing around the radical, so I can cancel the radical sign out by squaring that whole side and squaring that whole side. And squaring a radical does nothing. The numbers don't change. We just cancel that sign out. So I'm going to have, I ran out of room here. I'm going to be left with 3b minus 2 equals 25. And now this is just a regular algebraic equation that I can solve for b. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and I'm going to get 3b equals 27. Then I can divide both sides by 3, and b will equal, and you can't see that, 9. Okay? So I want you to get used to doing is canceling out the radical sign by squaring the whole side. You're not distributing. That little 2 doesn't go to each of these numbers under the radical. Its only purpose is to cancel out this radical sign. So why does it matter? Well, if we square this side, we have to square this side. So this number changes, but nothing under the radical changes. Okay, number 15. Okay, here we've got a fraction underneath the radical sign, but it doesn't matter because to cancel out the radical sign, I'm just going to square it. And so I have to square this side. So the 2 cancels the radical sign, and I'm left with x over 8 equals 4 squared is 16. And now to solve for x, right now it's x divided by 8, so I'm going to have to multiply by 8. So I got to do the same thing over here. This 8 cancels with this 8, and I'm left with x equals 80 and 40, 128. And you can always go back and plug that in for x and solve. Square root of 128 divided by 8. Let's do it. Should equal 4. 128 divided by 8 equals square root 4. Boom, done. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. All right, 2 more. Number 16 here. We've got, excuse me, the square root of 6x squared plus 5x equals 2. I'm going to square that side and square this side, and it looks like we might end up with a quadratic we have to solve here. So this 2 cancels my radical sign, and I'm left with 6x squared plus 5x equals, and then 2 squared is 4. So now I have 3 terms, an x squared, an x, and a plain number. So to solve this, I'm going to move this 4 over. 6x squared plus 5x minus 4 equals 0. And then you can pick your method of solving, right? You can complete the square. You can, actually we can't complete the square because we've got a number in front here. So you can factor, or you can use the quadratic formula. I think I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b, negative 5. Oops, negative 5, not b. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, 5 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. And now I just have to simplify that, which I have paper for right here. Good review of the quadratic formula. Okay, so negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 4 times 6 is 24. 24 times negative 4 is 24 times negative 96 all over 12. 25 minus negative 96 is going to be 25 plus 96. So that's going to be 119? 121. Not good with numbers. Just kidding. 121. So negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 121. Anybody recognize 121? It's 11 squared, right? So the square root of 121 is 11. So negative 5 plus or minus 11 all over 2. So I'm going to do 2 equations, negative 5 plus 11 over 2, negative 5 minus 11 over 2. And those should be my 2 answers once I solve. Negative 5 plus 11 is 6, and 6 over 2 is 3. Negative 5 minus 11 is negative 16, and negative 16 over 2 is negative 8. So my 2 solutions to that quadratic are positive 3 and negative 8. All right, a little solution set, negative 8, positive 3. There we go. A little review on quadratics real quick there. That was just last chapter, so you guys should still be well versed on it. Last problem, if I can squeeze it out before my dog barks. Let's see. All right, so I've got a 2, a radical sign, a plus 3, and an 11. So I need to get rid of this 3 and this 2 before I can touch the radical. So minus 3 from both sides. 2 square root, no, equals 8. And then I need to divide both sides by 2. So this 2 will cancel. This becomes 4. Then I can square both sides. Okay, Shrike. Shh. Thank you. And now I've got 3x over 5 equals 16. And now it's regular old algebra. I don't have this 2 and this symbol canceled each other out. So now I can multiply both sides by 5. 3x equals 90. 50 and 30 is 80. And then divide both sides by 3. Rely on my calculator. Oh, 26.6. Yeah. All right, 26 and a third. X equals 26 and 2/3. 26.6 repeating, or 26.67 if we solve. So if you guys have any questions at all, please let me know. Don't forget your rules of radicals, and stay tuned for the second part of this lesson.